Okay, Matrix, back to our next episode in your tutorials on the Beneficiaries, called 1978, Standard 8, Hadedas, and Earthworms. And essentially, this is about Lally as a 15-year-old in a boarding school in the Eastern Cape. She's a loner, she's a difficult eater, she observes things, she doesn't really connect with the other kids, and we learn of her connection again to Pim, and how that gives her some sort of association with the prefects. And it's a very interesting chapter actually, and opens a lot of doors of understanding into Lally and her character. So I just want to look at a couple of things. As I said before, we're not going into intense detail here, but mentioning things that are important in terms of you understanding what that's all about. The school she's at is a government school, but it's a well thought of government school. We see that it's not a private establishment, but it so nearly approximates one, that its inmates don't mind revealing. I like that the author calls it inmates, which clearly gives a sense of how Lally feels about this place, and possibly other kids feel about this place as well. Excuse me. Inmates usually has to do with prison. So it's interesting that she uses it. When the other kids have tea and sandwiches, she stays in her room, and we realize already there that she's a loner. The matron has singled her out as a difficult eater. She's weighed every week, and already we see that Lally is a little different and not really the same as the other children. We also read about the letters she receives from her parents, and this again gives us a open window into her experience of connection to home, of motherly and fatherly love. She says that her parents write letters, but actually she just then says actually her mom, and her mom signs from her mom and her dad. So there's no connection really to her father. There's particularly also no connection to her mother. She talks about a very sort of to and fro kind of letter writing situation where they don't really deal with anything in depth, but they tell each other what's happening in their lives superficially. There's no emotional connection. She goes through the motions, she fills in the letters and puts them into the envelopes that her mom has addressed to herself. She is apart from the other children, the author tells us, and she sees them in the same way. She sees them as different to her, but the stereotype of the other kids is a blonde ponytail, a sun-brown shank, pair of spectacles, a grin of wide teeth. And she's not like that. She is different. She sees them as one, as not having a mind of their own. And she kind of flies under the radar because she says she knows how to behave. And she's kind of seen of it as dull. It's amazing the way it says that the worst they might say of her that she was dull, and the boys leave her alone. Not pretty enough to solicit, not pretty enough to make moves on, but not ugly enough to mock and to taunt. And even though she's been there for a long time, she sort of fades into obscurity. She's one of those kids where you'll leave school and in 5 years' time you'll think, flip, who was that guy? Or who was that girl? And there'll be a real sort of sense that you remember the face, but you can't quite remember the name. There's a subtitle in that chapter called On Preferments, and this really refers to a theme that runs through the novel as well, where some people get preferential treatment over others. There's a hierarchy in the school. It's an institution. The prefects have a special wing, and the rules don't really apply to them. We see Lally invited up into Emily's room, but only for one reason, is Emily sees her a little as a bit of a sister, because Emily is in a relationship with Pim, with Edgar, who is out of school and is in the army, and yet Lally spends a lot of time at Pim's farm, and there's an obvious connection to Pim. And so Emily invites her into the prefect's annex simply because that's her connection to Edgar, who is off fighting the enemy, they say. So we see Emily inviting Lally up into the room, and Lally feeling very sort of awkward about that. She's worried about the fact that it makes her stand out. There are a couple of words in this chapter that I just want to bring to your attention. The one is Anschluss, and Anschluss is the word that refers to the annexation of Austria by Germany in 1938, and so that'll help you understand that part. If you talk about supra corpus juris, it really means above the body of the law. So she had encountered the fault in any other territory but the supra corpus juris minefield of the prefect's headquarters. She's saying these prefects are above the law. The rules don't really apply to them. Raison d'être, I don't know how to say that in French, but it's at the, you'll see it there on that page. But that means the main reason for something. So the main reason Lally has been invited up is because Emily has a photo of Pim that she wants to show. In loco parentis means acting as a parent or the legal parent at that time. And so there's a family that looks after her. We realize now that Lally doesn't go home necessarily for the holidays, but spends it at Pim's farm. And later on in the novel, she says, even though she spent some time at home, it didn't feel like home to her, and she much preferred being elsewhere. Pim is away fighting the enemy. Now, that's a very important thing to look at. What's important about that is this whole idea of the enemy. And in apartheid South Africa, the enemy was that the communists, black people, anti-apartheid people, the ANC, freedom fighters, guerrillas, and the enemy was always spoken about as the enemy. So people would always fear, especially white people would fear black people in that time because they were always portrayed as the enemy. White men who were fighting on the border, fighting the enemy, were seen as heroes because they were guarding the state that the white people had created in South Africa. The next chapter we'll look at is the chapter called Matrimony. There's not a lot we'll speak about there, but we'll get onto that in the next episode of The Beneficiaries.